My father left me a bank balance of $2 million, but when I asked my mother for money, she kicked me out of the house because it was my stepfather's order. 5 years later, my mother brought my sister and apologized because the stepfather is the one with my sister. I was looking at my mother in wonder. What she was saying to me was unbelievable to me. I was preparing for a school test for the past 2 hours. These questions had confused me, but now the mind I was sitting answering these questions. My mom dropped a bomb on my head that blew my mind. I had never spoken to my mom out loud before today. She always had a loving attitude. Our mother never had a strict attitude towards us, but we all lived with immense love and respect for each other. Because it was impossible, I shouted and said, "Mom, how can you think like that? You know what you are saying. I am with you. Seren is with you. You are talking about this while we are together. I believe that Baba is gone. I am sorry for you, but you will abuse us like this. We both spend time with you, talk with you, and we are all saddened by the loss of Papa. I know that Papa is in each other's hearts. I can't make up the shortfall, but still, I can never believe what you have said. God, consider your decision." I raised my voice in front of my mother for the first time and was shouting that you times are wrong. I have always supported you in every decision, but not this time. My mother, who was standing in front of me, bowed her head, clenched her fists, and said, "Son, do you feel bad hearing this?" "Yes, but I have made up my mind. I have decided that I will marry George. George is a good man. He will be a good father to you guys. Yes, I know, he will be my second husband, and you guys might like him like your father. Could not give love an adoption, but he has promised me that he will let you both live with me. We will live like a happy family in one house. Your father is dead, and now death with the dead does not go away." My mother was saying this to my father, who died 2 months ago for a non-person George. Tears came to my eyes with uncertainty. I felt that, "Mom, maybe you don't know what you're talking about. You have spent 19 years of your life with my father. Was this relationship of 19 years so weak that you got a new life partner for yourself 2 months after he left? They have already chosen." My mother turned her eyes away and said, "Son, you are still young. You can't understand all these things. I just said what I had to say. Me and George are going to get married this week. From this marriage, my daughter will get married. So no problem. She is happy to live with her new daddy in his house. But I don't know why you are having problems. They will go away." My mother had said so and left there, and I had thrown all my books and notes on the ground. She screamed and said that this can never happen. "I will scratch his face. I will put mud on his face. He is not worthy to be my father. It is your forgetfulness that I will give him the status of father." How easily she got into George's words. It was the same Uncle George who lived in our neighborhood. Until now, he had not treated us well, nor did I like him. I used to see that whenever my mother was working outside in the garden or sitting and reading the newspaper, they used to look through their wall or walk in front and look at my mother. I didn't like it since I often used to go home and talk to my mother. One day, when my mother was watering the plants in the yard, she was wearing a shirt and a mini skirt and bent down to water the plants. The moment I was busy, Uncle George came to the balcony of his house with a cup of tea in his hand. His eyes fell on my mother, and the next moment he had a smile on his face when he saw my mother. I immediately put my mobile phone in front of him. He had turned on the camera. I was going to play football with my friends. When my eyes fell on Uncle George, it was obvious that he was going to take pictures of my mother. The football was thrown towards him. Luckily, my aim was perfect, and it hit Uncle George's mobile phone, and his mobile phone fell down from the balcony. You didn't get a playground. Who plays football at home? Because of you, my mobile broke. When my mother saw Uncle George standing on the roof shouting, she turned towards me angrily, holding me by the ear and saying, "Son, how much? It is wrong. When you see that Uncle George is sitting in front, why did you throw the ball at him? The number's a bastard." I had abused Uncle George before I told my mother about Uncle George, that he was taking pictures of you, and the next moment my mother slapped me in the face. She hit me and said, "You rude boy, am I training you? You have no respect for elders. Where are you learning these things? These friends of yours are teaching you to do such rude things. After today, you will not be able to sit among your friends. Staying with your friends, you are getting worse. Apologize to Uncle George." "I'm sorry." Uncle George walked up to him and apologized loudly, but the next moment he said in a low voice, "If you try to make a picture of my mother again, I'll hit your face with this soccer ball. I swear it's just a picture of your mouth. It will change." Uncle George Tanzia smiled and said, "Children, don't take me lightly. Stay away from me. I'm angry. I'm not going to leave you." Apparently, he was smiling, but he was fixing my hair. I had come back to what he had said, and from the beginning I could see him keeping a bad eye on my mother when my father would come back from work, and both my mother and father would go out for a walk or whatever. When I used to go to Mr. George's house for tea in the neighborhood, Mr. George used to talk bitterly and sarcastically with my father. In a way, he thought that my mother had made a mistake by marrying my father. Should have been married to a tall, beautiful, handsome young man, not my father. Actually, I was shorter than my mother, not only that. My father was also 12 years older than my mother. My mother still looked young. But my father looked old. It didn't matter to my mother, but Mr. George must have put such doubts in my mother's mind. Time was passing slowly. She would go to George's garden to see his collection of domesticated rabbits and colorful birds, and Mr. George would take her on his lap and show her the birds, and give her a loaf of bread, of which my sister would feed the birds. I felt bad seeing my sister with him that day. When I saw my sister with Mr. George, I brought her home angry. She started crying, but I was scolding her, saying that again, "You call me Mr. You will not be seen with George. He is a bad person. You think that one day he will pick you up and hand you over to a huge ghost, or else he will lock you in the doorway of his house and leave big rats on you. The big cockroaches will come and eat you, and I will not come to help, and neither will Papa." After that, my little sister was so scared that she used to run away when she saw Mr. George coming near her again, but on us. Kiamat broke when my father died in an accident. The news of my father's death was a deep shock to all of us. We never thought that my father could leave us like this. I was involved in closing him in the coffin with great difficulty and had a farewell meeting with him. But maybe it was our luck. But only 2 months after my father's death, Mr. George had taken my mother down in such a glass that she was crazy about him. That day, when I came back from school, my mother and Mr. George was sitting in my house. Both of them had a drink in their hands, and they were very close to each other sitting on the couch. And you have become fresh. Believe me, you were starting to look old while living with your old husband. Now look at your beauty. The freshness of your face seems as if a huge old shadow has been removed from your head, and this beauty is because of this reason. It can be seen on your face that you are lucky that your life was spared from your husband. Hearing these words of Mr. George, my mother smiled and said that you cannot say that to my late husband. He was very good as he was. My parents got me married, but as long as they were alive, they fulfilled my every wish. As soon as she saw me, my mother was sitting away from Mr. George. I had quietly gone straight to my room. My bag was upside down on the bed, and only after that my mother came and told me this news. "Son, don't think anything wrong about us. We are going to marry each other. We will not live in this house where I feel strange confusion and anxiety. We will stay with Mr. George in his house. which is a new house. I was very sad when I told my sister that our mother is going to marry again. That is, our new father is coming. I don't know how he will treat us. Mr. George will remain. I don't know how long he has been dying on them, but both of our lives will be ruined. Our mother is already not listening to us. Both of them got married, then what will happen to us? I was somehow instigating my sister, trying to convince her mother that she should not marry again. It is only a matter of a few years to complete her studies. Anyway, my father had left a good bank balance, which was enough for us to live comfortably for many years, with $2 million in an account in my name. There were enough for us, but my mother still wanted to marry Mr. George. The day came when my mother was a bride. There were many people among our relatives who were mocking my mother, saying the same. What kind of woman is she? Hey, look, her son is young. Her daughter is still getting married, but my mother did not care about these things. Both were standing in the church, and the priest was getting them married. When the rites were completed, everyone was clapping as my mother approached her new husband, George. I didn't have the courage to look beyond her. Yes, there was the same picture when my brother-in-law was close to my mother in order to express his love. Those moments were still there on the wall, but my mother's betrayal was not easy to forget. After Mr. George's marriage, we came straight to Mr. George's house. At that time, I was not stable enough to stand on my feet and pay my own expenses. He came to his new house with me. My sister was very happy with him. He was very nice to Mr. George. But still, I used to stick with him when I saw my mother with Mr. George I was crushed inside. I just wanted Mr. George out of our lives somehow, but my mother blindly believed in Mr. George. It seemed to him that first Mr. George and later me and my sister had become so much in love that he probably did not even love my father as much as he started to love Mr. George. My father had accepted it, but it was not easy for me to accept it. My papers had started in school. It was my last year in school. They were the matriculation papers that I had given to both my parents in school for the result. My father was called, not right, but I wanted to take my mother to school, as always. This time, I got the first position. I wanted to, but my mother refused to go, saying that, "You know, son, we have just got married and we are going to a party. George's uncle has prepared a feast for us. You must go. Come home with your trophy. Then we will have a grand party for you." Hearing my mother's words, I shook her hand off my head and said, "Okay, you should enjoy your new marriage and your life with your new husband. Leave me alone." I felt that my mother would celebrate me like always. But she had left home with Mr. George, leaving me alone. The next day I came home with my report card and trophy sadly. My mother had probably forgotten that. I got such good marks that day I missed my father a lot. I sat and cried for a long time. My mother came to me after crying. She must have realized how big a mistake she had made. Taking the report card and the trophy in his hand, he said, "Well done, my son. You have made my name bright." I was sure that, like always, this time too, you will surely come with the prize, and look, you have done so. You have been very successful in life. I was successful. I kept listening to his every word. Then Mr. George also started coming towards me and said, "Wow, brother, you are a champion. I didn't know that you are so capable." He came and sat next to me laughing. It seemed that the next moment he raised his hand and said, "Be careful, Mr. George. You even tried to sit next to me, while my mother and I are sitting and talking. You have no right to say that you are both of us." After hearing this, my mother scolded me and said that it is bad, son. This is your father. I don't want congratulations. They were bad, they are bad, and they will remain bad. Go away from here. But my mother had hit my arm very hard and said that you should be ashamed. Don't you know how to talk? Is this what I taught you? Go away from here. If you can't trust my husband, then I don't want to be your mother. Go find your own place else." My mother said this to me in anger for Mr. George's sake. My eyes came to tears. With tears in my eyes, when I looked at Mr. George with bloody eyes, he had a sarcastic smile on his face. He was laughing and making fun of me. I was helpless and weak. He broke it into 2 pieces and threw the trophy straight at Mr. George, which was on his head. A line of blood started flowing from his forehead. My mother shouted and went to Mr. George. They ran towards me so that they could hit me, but I had closed the door of the room. "You will stay locked in the room? You have gone mad. You are not in your right mind. This is all you have to do. I will not leave you alive." They took Mr. George to the doctor while I was sitting in the room. No matter how long I cried, I was not going to kill Mr. George, who had taken my mother away from me. I didn't open it from the inside. When I opened my eyes in the morning, I was very hungry because I hadn't eaten anything during the night. When my stomach started hurting, I slowly came to the door. I unlocked the door and put my ear to the door. It was completely silent. It was as if there was no one in the house. I was asking you to open the door. I am hungry, but only one voice came from my mother screaming that if you are hungry, then die from me. But now this door will not open. You have misbehaved with Mr. George. You have hurt him. Yes, you will not be kicked out of this room until you fold your hands and apologize in front of him. I will not join hands in front of Mr. George. In response, my mother said that it is okay to die. Now, you will stay in this house only if you apologize to me and Mr. George. Otherwise, you will not get food or your needs will be met. Rather, you will be thrown out of this house. My mother was threatening me with threats. At that moment, an explosion occurred in my mind. I told my mother that my father had left $2 million for me, which was in the bank. He signaled to his sister, who came and opened the door. Mr. George was also sitting in front of the couch with a bandage on his head. I don't know what he would have done with you. I am the one who realized your feelings. I completely ignored Mr. George and walked to my mother. I have left my father in my name. Let him give it to me. I will leave this house. My mother's eyes were wide with surprise. He fell on the ground for a while, so he could not say anything. While Mr. George was also in a similar situation, he had already stood up from the sofa. I looked at my mother and said, "What are you looking at?" "I am my father's child, aren't you married? I am the child of who died just like my father died, so I am already dead for you. Now, quietly, give me the money my father gave me. If my sister wants to stay here, then it's fine. Otherwise, I will take her from here too." My mother's hands were trembling. Tears came to her eyes. She said, "Son, what are you talking about? Fights are always happening. I am with you. That is why Drayty was giving this threat, so that you will be afraid and do not make such a mistake again. But you are really talking about leaving this house. I give you trust. Take this money and go away. You are unfaithful like your father. He also left me alone in this life. Thank goodness it was Mr. George who took care of me. Otherwise, what would I have done as a single woman? You are going to give the boy such a huge amount of money. Hey, it will be blown and wasted in a week and come back. Give the children or not, this boy is going to be a stray." When she heard this from her mouth, she became silent, as if she had become a puppet of Mr. George's hand. "Go away. Stand on your own feet. Don't come back to me. You won't get that money. It belongs to me and my daughter, who accepted Mr. George as her father. Had shown the way out, I didn't stop there either. I had nothing but the house in which I used to live with my parents and sister. I looked at my sister that maybe she was with me. She agreed to go, but she also shook her head in the negative. She shook her head in the negative. I felt that it was okay that you left me alone in this life, but remember that if you ever need me in life, forget that you had a brother. I was opening this house. Huge spider webs had formed due to heavy storms and rains. The furniture of the house had become dusty. So looking around, I was running to cut this house, but now I had to live my life here. This was the house that gave me my own identity. I cleaned the dirty water that had collected inside from the windows, and then sat down exhausted, very thirsty and hungry, but there was no food and my pocket was empty. I bought bread and bun and came home. I was hungry, but I didn't want to waste money. After that, I slept in this house. For now, I had left my studies. I had no money. I was crying with my father's picture on my chest. But this turn did not happen. Yes, after my father's departure, my mother's true nature was revealed to me. I could clearly see how Mr. George had put her in a glass bottle. I continued to eat bread, but gradually the intensity of hunger was increasing. I wanted to do some business of my own. I hoped that my mother would call me back, would have convinced them to bring me back home, but no one had thought of me. Perhaps they had even forgotten whether I was alive or not. I will be brought back to this house, or my pocket money my mother will send me to this house. So, first of all, I started selling the furniture of this house. I left the furniture of one of my rooms while the rest of the lounge. He started sending some goods, decoration pieces, lamps, then selling such items in the dinner set. He started arranging his food with this money, but then one day an idea came to my mind. I saw my house, which has 8 rooms in the upper portion. There were also 3 other rooms in the lower portion except my room. After all, what was the use of this whole house? This was done with the uncle of the neighborhood who told some people about my house. 2 days later, a family had come to stay in the upper portion. There were too many. I could eat and drink as much as I wanted. I could buy new clothes for myself, but they were still insufficient for studies. Those boys who used to come to the university for study were given these rooms on rent, so 2 boys started living in one room and I started getting the rent. It was my mind that I used at the time. I was in the gallery. I had a regular door installed when I wasn't at home. It was regularly locked. I had cameras installed everywhere in the house. And at a young age, I started earning a lot of good dollars. And I had used my mind properly in time I had started my studies again. I had become good friends with these boys too, while the family living above treated me as their family too. There was dinner with Mushani, who lived in the upper portion, and all of us living in this house would sit together like a family and eat together. Very soon, I was out of all depression and sadness. If my mother and my sister were happy without me, I was happy without them, and much happier. I was continuing my studies. I wanted to get such a good job that I could earn the $2 million that my mother refused to give me in a month. I was like a talented boy from the beginning. I didn't give up. There was a time when I started working after completing my studies. Together we started our own small business. That business also started to give us double and quadruple growth day and night, and very soon this business had become a name in this city. I used to take my name as a motivation, and my professor used to tell my story to junior students as motivation. I had everything. I was happy. I considered Mushani as my grandmother that day. I had come to Mushani with the good news of my first project. See, maybe she had as much with me as she had left me. I was the one who cried the most because there was only one Mushani who was not related to me by blood, but still since she came to this house she had brightened up this house. She brought us all different colors from different cities. There were people of the same race, yet we were all tied together in a rope. She used to treat us very kindly. Where there is happiness, there is also sorrow. She was cooking and giving me sounds, and I was standing far away, laughing and saying that this is your own fault. Leaving your shoulder and resting your head on someone else's shoulder, it was necessary for this to happen to you. My sister was crying and folding her hands in front of me, calling me, but I was laughing. This dream was so hideous that I got up and sat on my forehead. Drops of sweat were glistening. I quickly picked up a glass of water lying on the side table and put it on my lips. I couldn't believe it. How strange it was. My sister was crying and I was laughing. I thought about something and then said that it was a dream. But even after so many years, my sister came to me in my dream. In what condition was she crying? The mental pressure had hit me. That night was so restless, I kept thinking that something was wrong with my sister, or something was going to happen. She was crying and calling me and I couldn't help her. Well, I thought it was just an illusion, and then lay down on my bed to sleep, but the whole night was spent changing my crotch. My sister's voice was ringing in my ears again and again. I wanted my sister. The next morning, I thought I should go outside the house where my sister lives with my mother, but Anna was upset if my mother and Mr. George saw me there instead of my sister. So maybe they think that I have retreated from my crush. I want to include them back in my life. At least, I couldn't. For 2 or 3 nights in a row, I had the same dreams. I was not able to pay attention, so these dreams made it impossible for me to live. Gradually, my panic and anxiety started to decrease when I started taking antidepressants to sleep at night, but I was not aware of this, that my sister is really going through a torture. A few weeks passed when I was in the office, then I got a call from a guy who was staying in my house. I had received money, but still, I did not leave this house because everyone living in this house had lived as a family. When I put the phone to my ear, it was Henry's phone. He was a little nervous and said, "Come home quickly. Guests have come and want to meet you. Both the mature women are crying a lot and asking you again and again." There were many explosions in my mind. My attention went to my mother and sister, thinking that she had not come to meet me. I left all the work and ran back home. As I expected, this was true. My mother and my sister were standing in front of the house. My mother had become very weak. Her eyes were swollen from crying. While my sister was wrapping a shawl around her, I could see red scratches on her face. Both of them were crying profusely. She folded her hands and started crying and said, while crying, "Son, forgive me. I have done a lot wrong with you. You don't know how big a mistake I have made by taking you out of my life. For a woman, it's strongest. The support is her husband and then her son. But I came to George's words and removed you from my life." I was surprised that such a sudden thing had happened to my mother, who came to me with regret. As soon as my eyes fell on my sister's face, the next moment she came running and hugged me on my chest. I started taunting my mother and said, "Why did you suddenly remember me? I had forgotten that I have a mother and a sister like you. You had forgotten me for so many years, but you suddenly came to me and asked for forgiveness. Why is there a need?" I felt that he was not a good person. He was only using us. He wanted our bank balance, for which he married me. Even after including me in his life, he had wrong relationships with other women. I was not the only one. I am ashamed to tell you what he has done with your sister. My mother started crying and said that George had transferred all that money to his bank on the pretext that after you left, then he said that all this money is mine, and I will start a business with it in which I am a 50% partner. I was happy, but George didn't start any such business. He used all the money for his pleasures. As the money started to decrease, he started fighting with me, and he was wrong with non-women in front of me. He continued to build a relationship, but I lost my senses when he started keeping a wrong eye on my daughter. I thought he was the real father of my daughter. George attacked your sister's honor when he got lonely. For 3 days he used her for his own needs and then starved her and left her to die. When I came back and saw your sister's condition, I didn't let go, but by then George had run away from home. He left us nowhere. He ruined us. When my mother told me the truth, it was hard for me to believe. I never dreamed that this George could fall to this extent. I caught George, who had fled to another city. The police had taken him into custody and brought him to the police station. You can torture me. I had eternal enmity with George, but I could not forget what he did to my sister. I tortured George as much as I could until he cried. He begged me to die, saying, "Don't torture me anymore, kill me, I don't want to live anymore," but I subjected him to all kinds of torture, and then left me to rot in jail for the rest of my life, to my mother and sister. They were also angry. They appreciated me when George cheated on them. I bought a separate house and started to house my mother and sister there, while the $2 million that was my father's inheritance. I sold all George's property and received the house. My mother was very embarrassed. She was apologizing to me again and again. Attitude. I forgave them, and my sister was innocent. She was just looking for protection from her mother. It took a while for our relationship to be back to normal, but we were back to normal. My mother sat by my side. She blames George and says how George robbed me, took everything in his name, how much he tortured me, what he did wrong with your sister, but I keep listening to his every word because it is all my mother's fault. Who made the wrong decision to start her life with George? If she hadn't done that, life would have been different today. But everything that happens in life has a purpose. This was probably written in the fate of my sister, and if my mother had not asked me to leave home that day, I would not have been so successful today. However, this was a story of my life, which remains to be seen.